Well, former President Thabo Mbeki says South Africa must continue to strengthen its relationship with Namibia. Mbeki says Namibia's founding president, Sam Nujoma, was determined to ensure that the ANC and SWAPO continue to cooperate in the development of the Southern African region. SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena spoke to former President Mbeki about the life and times of the late Namibian president.
Well, it's such a long time ago, Sophie. It would have been when I came to Lusaka in 1971, having spent a few years in Europe, came back to the ANC headquarters in 1971. That would have been when I met him physically, I think. But you know, the President Nujoma was one of our leaders. I mean, one of our leaders in a real sense of that word, because we didn't treat him as a leader belonging to another organization. He was one of our own leaders, President Nujoma, because of the relationship between SWAPO and the ANC. For instance, 1977, 78, I was the ANC representative in Nigeria. And when we got there, we found a SWAPO representative already there, Konja Kambala. And what we did was we merged the two offices. So it was one organization. We both of us published journals, but with one editor. And I led the group. Publicly, we spoke as two different organizations, but functioned as one. And even when President Nujoma came to visit Nigeria, we told him that, we reported that we're functioning as one office. And actually was not very happy with our report in this sense. He said, but why do you think it's necessary for you people to report that? Because that's exactly how you're supposed to work. So that was the relationship. I'm saying that the President Nujoma was to us one of our leaders. Not a leader of SWAPO, but a leader of our own struggle. That's the connection between the two organizations, because we both had one oppressor, which was the apartheid regime, and therefore this common struggle for liberation was a common struggle to defeat the same enemy. And therefore the two organizations worked very well together in that context, so that his loss, Comrade Sam Nujoma, is passing away now, of course, we feel it as a personal loss, all of us who were there at the time. Is the last, I think is the last of that generation of leaders who led that struggle to defeat colonialism and apartheid. And so he represents, in a sense, the end of an age, and the end of an age and end of a generation which did a lot, and gave an example as to what needs to be done. And indeed, even when I became president, they were already independent, and he was president of Namibia. We worked in that context. You'd remember that, for instance, Walvis Bay. Walvis Bay was, in terms of those colonial arrangements, part of South African territory. Unlike the rest of Namibia was necessarily as a colony. But Walvis Bay was, in that context, South African territory, and we decided in 1994 that we are not going to enter into any negotiations with the government of Namibia about this, because this is Namibian territory. So we just handed it over. We said this is Namibian territory. At this point, this argument of the apartheid regime that is South African territory, like the way the Americans argue about Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. That is American. We wouldn't take a position like that, because I'm saying of our relationship with SWAPO, and therefore with President Nujoma, we handed over Walvis Bay because we thought it was Namibian territory. So even in a matter which continues to be discussed now, which is that historically, internationally, where you have a river or a waterway, which is a boundary between two countries, normally what happens is the boundary is drawn in the middle of the waterway. And therefore the argument that the boundary between South Africa and Namibia should be in the middle of the Orange River. And the position we took was that we didn't need that. The colonial boundary, which according to the OAU, we must respect those boundaries. The South African boundary is on the northern bank of the Orange River. So the entirety of the Orange River is South African. And so, of course, naturally the matter is raised, well, why don't we do what is done internationally and throw it in the middle of the river? And our own view was that we don't need to go through all of that. And we said to our Namibian comrades that, look, the boundary, according to these colonial things, is on the northern border. But in terms of our relations, you have access to the entirety of the Orange River. So we won't arrest you because your boat or somebody's on the southern bank of the Orange. That you have entire access to this, and we can write that down, and there's no need to be engaging in these detailed negotiations which go for international arbitration and all that. I am just saying, Sophie, it was describing the nature of our relationship with the Namibians, and President Nujoma was very fundamental in terms of defining those relations as relations of comradeship, as I was saying, against a common enemy. Indeed, that in the end we work for the same goal.
Mr. President, I remember the World Summit on Sustainable Development here in Johannesburg, that heated debate, even calling out the then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Tony Blair, quite a straight talker, President Nujoma.
He was indeed a straight talker. He was never a diplomat. But it was never intended to offend people. It was not unnecessary aggressiveness. It was the need to state clearly what the correct positions were. And he had that capacity to do that. He didn't hesitate. As I say, I don't think it caused harm anyway. People might not have liked it, but it was not ill-intentioned, it was not aggressive, it was not intended to embarrass anybody, including Tony Blair, but indeed to represent the truth as it was. And nobody, I've never heard anybody complain about that he is too honest and too straightforward, because I think people understood why he spoke the way he did.
The formation of the AU, he was there, you became the first chair of the AU, transformation of the Organization of African Unity to the AU. The role he played in terms of supporting that process.
Well, I mean, we were all of us together in the process of that transition from the OAU to the AU. I must say that the person who pushed this matter very hard and very correctly was Colonel Gaddafi. It's him who insisted on this, that we needed an organization that was more assertive about these issues of African unity than the OAU, that you need an African organization which, for instance, would not say in a situation where war crimes are being committed in one country, you say, no, that's an internal affair, that would be wrong. That as Africans, we owe an obligation to one another, and therefore you need a different kind of organization. So I'm saying that it really is basically Colonel Gaddafi who led this matter very correctly, and we then supported him. And as a region here, we worked effectively, worked together. And in our case, in talking relation with SWAPO, the advantage was that we are not, of course, we're all independent states by now, but the fact of the matter is that there was this other basis for our relationship, which is the old relationship between liberation movements. So that all of these issues about African unity, African Renaissance, had been matters that were discussed as liberation movements, come to the same common position, so that in terms of the cooperation with regard to the transition from the OAU to the AU, we continue to work together in the same spirit has inspired our working together as liberation movements.